What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the cast announcement for Avengers Doomsday and what I think it could mean for the movie's potential. Now, there are no spoilers in this one, seeing as how the movie doesn't come out for another year and a half or so no need to exit the video to keep from hearing anything that has to do with what happens in it. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Avengers Doomsday is an upcoming superhero film based on the Marvel Comics superhero team, the Avengers. Produced by Marvel Studios and AGBO, and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures, it is intended to be the fifth installment in the Avengers film series following Avengers Endgame from 2019, and the 39th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU. Directed by Anthony and Joe Russo and written by Michael Waldron and Stephen McFeely, the film features an ensemble cast including Chris Hemsworth, Vanessa Kirby, Anthony Mackie, Sebastian Stan, Letitia Wright, Paul Rudd, Wyatt Russell, Tanak Huerta Mejia, Iban Mok Baccarat, Simu Louis, I know I messed that name up, Florence Pugh, Kelsey Grammer, Louis Pullman, Danny Ramirez, Joseph Quinn, David Harbour, Winston Duke, Hannah John Kamen, Tom Hiddleston, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Alan Cumming, Rebecca Romaine, James Marsden, Channing Tatum, Pedro Pascal, and, of course, Robert Downey Jr. Two new Avengers films, The Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, were both announced in July of 2022 as the conclusion of the MCU's Phase 6 and the Multiverse Saga. Destin Daniel Cretton was hired to direct The Kang Dynasty, and Jonathan Majors was set to reprise his MCU role as the villain Kang the Conqueror. Now, Jeff Loveness joined the film as writer that September. In November 2023, Creighton departed. Waldron replaced Loveness, as writer, and Marvel was considering moving away from the Kang storyline, in large part due to Majors' legal issues. Majors was fired the following month. The return of the Russo brothers as directors and McFeely as writer, the casting of Downey as the new villain Dr. Doom, and the new subtitle Doomsday were all announced in July of 2024. Filming is taking place from March to August of this year at Pinewood Studios in England, with a large cast consisting mainly of actors from previous MCU media and other Marvel films. Avengers Doomsday is scheduled to be released in the United States on May 1st of 2026 as part of Phase 6 of the MCU. The film's sequel, Secret Wars, is set to be released on May 7th of 2027. So, first off, as a writer, I understand that, most of the more popular characters have all moved on where the MCU is concerned, right? Iron Man and the real Captain America most of all. And that means that we kind of have to be ready to accept the B-team Avengers in this one. And so, make no mistake, I was prepared for that. I have also reached a point of accepting the fact that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back, this time to play the villainous Dr. Doom, even though, as I've stated before, I don't like the choice. I don't like it one bit. And you can go and check out the short that I made when that was announced for all the reasons why I think that's a bad decision. If you're interested, you can find the link down in the description. Now, what I wasn't expecting was essentially 26 heroes crammed into what I'm expecting to be a 2.5-hour movie, which leads me to expect that most of these characters will be reduced to simple cameos, and I don't think this strategy bodes well for the film. And, the characters that they're including are puzzling to me, especially where the X-Men are concerned, especially where the X-Men are concerned, because they're not even bringing the recent iterations of the X-Men characters They're going back to actors who played the characters back in the early 2000s. And of course, without access to a script, I'm not quite sure why, other than maybe the fact that, the film takes place in the present day and a lot of the recent X-Men films have been, set in an earlier time. But I still just think, why bring back actors to play iterations of these characters that we haven't seen in a really, really, really long time? And like I said, the only thing that makes sense to me as to why this decision got made is that Marvel and Disney are trying to copy what was done in the Deadpool and Wolverine movies, bringing back characters, in this case, actors playing characters, like I said, that we haven't seen in years simply for nostalgia's sake. And I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I think it absolutely reeks of desperation here. It tells me not to expect very much in the way of a well-constructed narrative, and that's a shame. Now, Patrick Stewart as Professor X and Ian McKellen as Magneto I can live with, mostly because I think those choices, again, simply speak to the time period the movie will take place in. Plus, we've seen them play the older versions of these characters as recently as Days of Future Past, I believe, with their younger counterparts, appearing in the flashbacks, Fassbender, and them appearing in the flashbacks, right? Now, Hugh Jackman's name is missing here, so I guess we won't be getting a Wolverine sighting, which would have maybe been the most awesome thing that could have happened with the X-Men kind of appearing here. But, I digress. Now, I'm confused as to why we're getting Rebecca Romijn as Mystique, James Marsden as Cyclops, and Kelsey Grammer as Beast, unless the writers are going to be telling a story where all the X-Men are past their prime. And if that's the case, then I'm wondering why they decided to include them at all, right? Why waste these characters when you can just save them for the hard X-Men reboot under the Disney Marvel banner that we all know is coming? Why, blow your load, so to speak, by having the older X-Men show up past their prime for, again, like I said, what feels like it'll probably just be like a little cameo or whatever. So it's kind of like some misdirection, manipulation nonsense to begin with. And that has me kind of concerned. There are more than enough other heroes to carry this film in their absence, if you ask me, right? I also feel like we're going to get another discount Black Panther situation with Letitia Wright playing the hero. And I want to be clear. I've got no problem. I understand in the comic books that that Black Panther was female for a little while, but let's be clear. In the movie, that's not what we're showing up to see. And when I saw Black Panther 2, I just wasn't impressed, right? Black Panther 2 was basically a Black Panther movie without Black Panther. You would never see a Superman movie without Superman. That's crazy. It's absolutely bananas, right? And this makes me wish they had just recasted T'Challa after Chadwick Boseman's death. And before you guys come for me saying that I'm being insensitive, I want to be clear. I loved him as an actor. He did phenomenal work in a lot of movies. Loved him. And I loved seeing him as Black Panther. But I mean, we've had situations where actors who played superheroes passed on and those superheroes were recast. Superman, and others were recast. And so there's a precedent for this kind of thing. Plus, I think even Chadwick Boseman would rather the Black Panther legacy within the confines of the MCU continue than to simply go away because he's not around to play the character anymore. But needless to say, may Chadwick Boseman rest in power. Loved him as an actor. So let's not, get off track, in the comments about that, right? I guess we're going back to Wakanda at some point during this story because Winston Duke is back as well as the actor who's going to play Namor. Does something take place in Wakanda where we see these characters? And again, I have to ask myself, if that is the case, how long are we going to be in Wakanda, right? Is this going to be, again, basically a glorified cameo, right? 2 or 3 minutes, they're in, they're out. You know what I mean? Now, Paul Rudd as Ant-Man, I have to admit, is always a good time, right? I actually like Paul Rudd, and I like Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. So I'm good with his inclusion, and at this point in the timeline, I just assume that means that his daughter's coming along as well. So we'll just have to see how all that plays into what happens in the story. We'll just have to do it that way, right? Now, I expected to have Anthony Mackie included as he was already contemplating forming a new Avengers squad in Brave New World, so that wasn't surprising. And having Danny Ramirez join him just felt like the obvious decision, according to how Brave New World went. So, I don't have an issue with that. Now, I think that all of the Thunderbolts are present and accounted for, so I guess that means none of them will die in the upcoming movie, spoiler alert. But I wasn't surprised by their inclusion here because they seem like the obvious choice to start, when you start talking about putting together the B team Avengers, as is the Fantastic Four, especially since Doctor Doom is their arch nemesis, and he's appearing in the movie. So you just kind of assume that with the Fantastic Four movie coming out, and then with Doctor Doom being in Doomsday, that the Fantastic Four would somehow be involved. So I got no issue with that. Now, I was surprised to see Thor coming back for this one, right? And as the most senior member of the Avengers squad, and maybe the most powerful of the heroes listed, that we can debate that. Maybe he'll be the leader of the group here, with Doctor Strange and not Captain America as the other team captains. I suppose that could be mildly interesting to see. Basically who's going to lead this new Avengers squad. That's something that would be on my list of things to kind of go into the movie to, watch for and see and kind of comment on. So, there's that. That's something. But the biggest problem here, the problem that should stick out like a sore thumb to any and everybody who's ever watched these movies, is that you can't possibly give all these characters interesting enough arcs in the time that would be allotted, which means that most people, again, will end up disappointed with how their favorite characters end up being treated from a narrative perspective. And heaven forbid any of them die without having done anything significant, right? Which I wouldn't typically think I would need to worry about, because you would think that professional screenwriters would know better. But lately, the writers of these films haven't shown great discernment where these types of decisions, these creative decisions, are being made. Sometimes they really just act like they don't understand what they're doing. And so I really, at this stage in the game, couldn't tell you whether some nonsense like that is going to go down or not. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, if I had to cut characters and trim this thing down, without having any idea what the script is going to be like, so, take this with a grain of salt, but I'm sorry, I would start with Channing Tatum's Gambit and Iman Vellani's Miss Marvel, and even Alan Cummings' Nightcrawler character, right? And probably, to be honest with you, all of the X-Men in this case, not because I hate them or anything, because, I don't, some of my favorite characters are X-Men, even more so than Avengers. But just because I have a bad feeling about their inclusion, I just really, I smell the foolishness coming. I really, really do. And so I kind of go, I would rather them just take all the X-Men out and save them, for, like I said, a hard reboot. You're going to probably end up recasting those characters anyway, almost all of them. And so you just kind of save that for an X-Men movie of some kind. But, I reserve the right to change my decision. And we'll have to see about how Loki is involved here. I'm not quite sure about him as of yet. I'll have to reserve the right to change to decide about his inclusion once I see how he's involved in this whole mess, right? We'll just have to really, really wait and see, because from what I understand, he's holding together the multiverse, single-handedly. And so maybe that's kind of how he will be, involved here. Now, look, there were 6 Avengers in the first movie. 6. And that proved to be more than enough to get the job done. But for some reason, the writers have decided that more is more here, right? Marvel seemed to have learned all the wrong lessons from Deadpool and Wolverine, as the film was a narrative mess, despite being both a box office success and a lot of fun, right? But the movie wasn't written to be strong from a narrative perspective. It was kind of a mishmash of things that were just kind of slapstick, meant to kind of just make you laugh and just be like a fun kind of roller coaster ride. So you're willing to accept that in a one-off, right? So I expect this movie to be a little too much of the same in that vein, because I always have to remind myself that these studios are in the business of printing money, not necessarily producing high-end cinematic entertainment, right? you always have to remember that if the movie sucks but the box office is good, the studios are celebrating. They're popping champagne. That's a win for them. And so for those of us who are expecting good writing and good storytelling and stuff like that, you have to disabuse yourself of the notion that the studio gives a crap about, how good the writing is. They only care about what the box office numbers look like. And here, the only thing that really piques my attention, to the point of being excited for the movie, is to basically see which one of these characters will actually be Avengers in this film. Because again, 26 characters, that's bananas, right? As I expect most of them will just lend a hand in stopping Doctor Doom. And I'm not necessarily willing to lean on who were members of the Avengers in the comic books, because the writers don't have to follow the comic book canon at all here. I keep telling you guys that that's what the money is for, right? It's for the right to do whatever the hell you want with characters that other people created. That's literally what the money's for. And so I always tell people, the books of anything, comic books, novels, whatever, and the movies or TV shows, completely two different things, and people can't be married to, well, in the books, this is what happened, right? And Marvel and the MCU, in my opinion, well, not in my opinion, but, factually, if you kind of go look at box office numbers, has been slowly dying for a while now for a lot of reasons. But as the most popular Marvel characters have passed the baton to less popular ones, and as the writers of these films have started putting propagandist agendas ahead of strong storytelling, combined with the sheer number of Marvel properties being produced, swelling to overwhelming numbers when you count TV shows and one-off films and films in the MCU and everything. And the people who, you have to remember, the people who flock to the theaters to see the first Avenger and the first Avengers are simply aging out, right? These are now people who, were maybe teenagers or maybe young kids when these movies came out, that are now adults and who just care a little less about this kind of thing. I also tell people, I think that people might be marveled out, right? Because the ongoing overarching narrative structure of a story that spans infinite movies and television shows with no ending in sight becomes less and less interesting the longer it goes on. Imagine if you were watching a TV show for 20 years. Most TV shows would not be able to hold your attention for 20 years. That's why most of them don't last for 20 years. I tell people nowadays, you got 4 seasons, and that's about it. So, you got to keep that in mind as well. But with Disney acquiring X-Men and Spider-Man characters full time, I felt like this was a chance for Disney and Marvel to hit the reset button and reinvigorate the Marvel brand by being able to bring X-Men to the forefront, Wolverine to the forefront, Spider-Man to the forefront, in a way that's been different than what we've seen in the past. But instead of being creative and playing the long game here, where the Neo characters are concerned, they seem to have opted for nostalgia porn instead. But what do you guys think? Did the cast announcement get you excited for Avengers Doomsday? That long-ass cast announcement? Do you think Marvel chose the right characters to include in this movie? Do you think the writers will be able to write a coherent, well-paced story with such a crowded cast? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themadscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all in the next video.